Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of our Green Building Matters podcast. I'm really excited today to interview Francine. She's down in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and she's the founder at SEED Solutions. So can't wait to learn more about her journey through this green building movement. Francine, how you doing today?
Hi, Charlie. I'm doing great. And you?
Yeah, doing great here. These interviews always give me energy. I've been fortunate to be doing this for almost 5 years now. So for any new listeners, make sure you go back. We've had a lot of incredible guests on, and it's just been a blast. Francine, I'd love to just ask, that origin story. So where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Charlie, for inviting me for this podcast. I'm very happy to be here to have this conversation with you. Well, I grew up in Rio de Janeiro, where I am here in Brazil. And it's a very big city, but it's also full of nature. And since I was a very, small kid, like 6 or 7 years old, I was already a tree hugger. And I was very influenced by Eco 92. We had a UN conference here in Rio de Janeiro in 92. So, our school started to, talk about this, and environment was a very important issue with this conference. So since that time, I was already involved with a bit of, in the environment and protecting the nature and everything. So I grew up with this inside my heart. And, and then when I had to go to college, I chose architecture because I also always loved the building environment and just constructions in general. So I started my architecture university, and I didn't have much related with sustainability at that time because it was, 2000 was the year that I joined my architecture university. But at the end, I tried to make my final project in the university. I tried to make something that was related with sustainability. And then I think that from that point on, I just started to include sustainability in my life and in my work, all the time. So it's a real passion for me.
Now, I love how that was just in your youth and then that UN event and how that had influence on you. And so architecture, tell us about that. How was it, going to college there? I think we're pretty close in age. I was there at Georgia Tech around 2001, and I think you started 2001. And so just what was it then? Were you studying energy efficiency, or was that showing up in the curriculum or not yet?
No, it wasn't showing up in a curriculum. I think that the only thing that was related with sustainability at that time was human comfort, was the only actual discipline that I had in the university that had a little bit of influence and, impact over this kind of thing. So I really missed that. And I had to study by myself and learn things by myself. So when I had to do my final project, and I decided to do an environmental center in one of the national parks that we have here in Brazil. And then I kind of have to start looking for things outside Brazil. So that's when I actually started to know a bit more about LEED and all this movement that was happening already, bringing the green building movement. So I started to have a little bit of contact with that in my final year in architecture university. So, that's it. I had to look for myself and study by myself. And the university didn't really help me with that.
And then you went back and I think you got a master's and some other degrees and certificates. Now, when did LEED first show up for you?
Yeah. Well, when I graduated from the university, I started to work with project coordination. And I worked with really cool projects like cultural projects, museums and churches restorations. And they were very complex projects. And we had multidisciplinary teams, but they just didn't have anything related with sustainability. And that really bugged me. So I stayed in this job for a while, but then when I tried to convince everybody to, let's bring some sustainability strategies into the projects. Let's talk about energy efficiency. And they just didn't want to do that. So I decided to quit my job. And I said, I don't want to work here anymore because, that's not the path that I want to follow. And then that's when I decided to take a master's course in London. So I moved to London and took a master's course there in sustainable architecture. And that was a big change for me. And when I was there, I had the opportunity to have classes with some sustainability consultants. And in the UK, they talk about BREEAM, right? So they had BREEAM, but they also talked about LEED. And that's when I started to take a look, like a closer look into this world of LEED. And so when I came back to Brazil, I decided, okay, I'm going to become a LEED AP because that's the natural path for me because I want to work with that. And so I decided to take the test by myself. I didn't have anything. I just studied by myself. And I took the LEED AP exam, the first LEED AP exam. And when I was here already in Brazil, at the time, Brazil economy was very good, was booming. It was a very good time for the construction sector in Brazil. And I decided that I wanted to work as a sustainability consultant. So I started to work because there were already a few companies, very few companies in Brazil that were starting to work with LEED. Because the first LEED certified project in Brazil was in 2005. So, and that was 2010. It was 5 years after that, after the first LEED certified building. So there were like 2 or 3 companies that were starting to talk about that. And so I sent my CV to one of them and one of them sent me and they asked me to join them. So that's when I really started my career in LEED and sustainability.
It's amazing. And then, fast forward, you become a LEED fellow, you've worked on all these projects. And so yeah, I think you were there at that company for quite some time. And then let's connect some of the dots. What kind of projects were you working on during that time? Like, I think Brazil has become a leader, a lot of LEED projects now, but maybe then, maybe not as many. So what kind of projects were doing sustainability and green buildings early in that LEED career for you?
Yeah, the first LEED certified projects in Brazil, they were corporate projects, right? Core and shell projects, because they were the movement started mainly because of the multinational companies that we had in Brazil, and they started to look at that. So they wanted to work in corporate spaces with LEED certification. And then that's how everything started here. So basically we had lots of core and shell corporate. And then we started to have new construction because there were some companies that started to build their own places, their own buildings. And they said, okay, so now I also want to have a LEED certified building. So we had lots of that. And when the years started to go by, there was a very strong lobby here in Brazil when the World Cup came to Brazil. So all the stadiums of the FIFA World Cup, they had kind of, how can I say it? Well, not an obligation, but they had benefits if they were certified. They had a kind of a environmental certification, not only LEED, but at the end, most of them chose LEED. So we also started to work with stadiums. So I had stadiums, I had corporate spaces, I had institutional buildings, and we also started to have neighborhood design projects, which were very exciting because we had like big spaces that we had to take a look at. And so, yeah, I think that those were the most important ones. We also had museums. I worked in some museums too in Brazil that had LEED certification. And interiors too, but I didn't work that much with interior design because I was very focused in new constructions and in the stadiums at the time. So It was a really great time because we had so many buildings working with LEED certification, so many different typologies. So it was a really great training for me for everything that was coming next.
All those different building types. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. We'll get to current in just a minute. But when you look back, though, let's talk about any mentors or anyone that maybe opened a door for you along the way. Anyone you want to give a shout out to there?
Yes. Well, first, there was a very important teacher I had at the university, which was Renato Menescal. He guided me through the most important parts of architecture, and he showed me how functionality is so important because we have here in Brazil, Oscar Niemeyer's architecture, which is a very famous architect in Brazil. And he works a lot with, we say that they are sculptural buildings, right? They are very beautifully designed, but we cannot forget about functionality. That was the most important lesson that I had from this teacher. So he was very important in my background. And in terms of LEED, I had a very important mentor too, which was Anderson Benici. He's also a LEED fellow, and he was my direct when I worked in the consultancy company, which was CTE at the time. So he was my director and he was my mentor. And he pushed me a lot. He gave me a lot of challenges because he knew I liked challenges. So it was like almost every month he said, okay, I have a new challenge for you, new project, like everything that you don't know yet, let's do this. So it was very important for me, for my growth and for my entire, LEED background. And he also had the ability to put people together, the right people together to work in the project. So I had a chance to work with very passionate people, very committed people at the team. So there were like really great times that we had working together, and he definitely pushed me to, be the professional that I am right now.
Thank you. I love just giving that look back to mentors, those that influenced you, encouraged you, and opened some doors. Francine, what are some of your proudest accomplishments?
Well, I can say that one of my proudest accomplishments today is to have built Seed Solution, my company, from scratch. Because I think that being an entrepreneur is not easy. It's very hard. And at the time when I decided to become an entrepreneur and open my own company, my child was very young. She was only 2 years old. And so I had to, cope with balance these roles, like being a mother and being an entrepreneur. And there was always some guilt involved. So every time I was working, I was a little bit guilty that I wasn't with my kid. And every time that I was with my kid, I was a little bit guilty that I wasn't doing something for my company because I knew there's lots to be done. And I think that today I am extremely happy that I built Seed, and I cannot see myself in any other position than I am right now. But of course, it's really hard to build a company from scratch. And I think that many times today we have like a romanticized vision of what is being an entrepreneur. Like you just have to, you stay in your garage and you're drinking and you're doing stuff and playing video games and everything works well for you. And it's really not the reality, isn't it?
Oh, that makes me chuckle because, yes, I've been there with you, and it's a lot of work, but it definitely is rewarding, and I'm glad that's one of your biggest accomplishments. Obviously, you have the credentials, you have the amazing projects, and you're a LEED fellow also. I know that's validating. So tell us about your company you started, and tell us about some of the work you're doing today.
Yeah. So I started my company in 2018, and one of the purposes of Seed is to bring a little bit of sustainability for the companies that don't have that yet. So I worked a lot with, like I said, the top buildings in Brazil, like biggest companies and biggest projects. And I had this urge to spread the word of sustainability, for other companies, smaller ones, and people that still weren't working with that. So that was the purpose that I opened Seed with this purpose. And well, thankfully I am being able to fulfill this and every day. So the company started in 2018, and today I have already worked with more than 50 clients, and we have some very special LEED projects going on. So I can tell you about one that that I'm really excited to be working with, which is the National Museum. It's a project, one of the biggest anthropology and natural history museums in the Americas. And the building was also the palace for the royal Portuguese family in the 19th century. So it's a very important building, historically speaking. But unfortunately, in 2018, the building was caught on fire with an accidental fire, and it was completely destroyed. It was like 85% of its collection was lost. And the building itself, the only thing that remained were the facades and the internal divisions, because since it was a historical buildings, we had really thick walls, so the walls resisted. But it was a really sad story. And now, UNESCO, together with Brazilian government and banks and few institutions, they're working together to reconstruct the museum. And the work started like more or less 2 years ago. And I am lucky enough to be part of this team. So I'm responsible for doing the sustainability consultancy for the building. And so we're pursuing LEED certification and also ProCell certification, which is a Brazilian energy efficiency certification that we have here.
Keeping you busy, and some exciting projects and some meaningful projects there. Obviously, born and raised, and I know you care a lot about your country, and a lot of sustainability needed. In the last several months, I've been venturing myself into Latin America. And so I'm curious as to maybe new construction, green buildings. LEED is maybe in a really good place. But how about existing buildings? Are you starting to see a need to go in and retrofit or ESG? Is that starting to happen around you too?
Yes, it's starting to happen. I think that the ESG movement has a lot of responsibility in this movement. We already had some few projects, I can say, from investment funds that were pursuing GRAS, and then they were working with, LEED OM and things like that. But I am seeing now a bigger movement from not only investment funds, but also from other companies that are starting to look into their existing buildings and trying to pursue LEED certification. So I think this is starting to happen now in a more intense way. And I also believe that this is happening because of the ESG that's, coming very strong worldwide. So in Brazil, it's not any different. And I can see that happening here too.
Good. No, I've seen that, and maybe incoming new leadership and president, more progressive. And hopefully that just means a lot of work for you and your team.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully.
If you had a crystal ball and could predict the future, what are you excited about, Francine? You've been in this green building movement a while. So have I. What's coming down the road that you're kind of excited about?
Well, I'm really excited right now about greenhouse gas emissions and how this can have an impact in our buildings, because I truly believe that buildings are responsible for a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions in Brazil and in the world. So I think this is something that we still haven't addressed properly. And I think that now with the ESG movement, we're going to have to address. And I can see this happening right now. And I'm pretty sure this is something that will have an exponential growth. And we'll be talking a lot more about this in our buildings. And of course, this will come with life cycle analysis also, and with GHG emissions reports. So I'm very excited about that, because I think that now we're going to take a closer look into this topic that was always a little bit neglected for me.
So important. I mean, carbon is the ultimate measure now, GHG, ESG, but all this per building, one at a time, rolls up into helping the cause. What about healthy buildings? Is that still happening here, even coming out of the pandemic? Are you starting to see a little well and fit well? How's that going?
Mm-hmm. Well, after and during the pandemic, I could see that we had a movement, of course, because health started to be very important and people started to look at their buildings and understand how this measures and how air quality is so important, things like that. So in Brazil, I saw for well and fit well happening starting in the pandemic. And I think that it's kind of, how can I say, stable now. I didn't think it started to grow, but I think that it became stable movement since the pandemic. But I think there are some difficulties to implement well here in Brazil because we have several tests and we have also the operation that we need to do. So there are some things that they're just factors that make it difficult for the companies to implement well here. And I think this is the reason why we didn't see more projects in Brazil having this certification. But Fitwell is already being implemented because I think it's a bit easier in a way in terms of the tests and things that we need to do. So I've seen some companies that are working with Fitwell projects too, residential ones too. So yeah, it's still a little bit shy, I think, the movement here in Brazil, but I believe that we have a lot of space for growth. If some difficulties of this kind of testings and things that we have in well are addressed somehow.
Thank you for that peek into your part of the world. Let's get to know you a little bit more here. Francine, what would you say is your specialty or gift?
Well, I think that one of the things that I believe is my specialty is to do project coordination in a very smooth way, and especially when we have complex projects. So I had the opportunity to work in my career in very complex projects where we had multidisciplinary teams, like very big multidisciplinary teams. And this helped me understand how important the integration of all disciplines are and how they need to have this integration so the project can run smoothly. So I believe this is one of my specialties today, to work in complex projects. And the other thing that I believe that I have and that is very good for the project is that I am always very excited about working with sustainability, and I bring this energy to the projects that I work with and to the team, to the design team. So I think this is very important in terms of, when you put your energy and when people start to feel that you're really passionate about this and that it just helps things go smoother. And so I think that this is a good thing that I bring to the table and when it comes to projects and management.
Absolutely. Well, I love your energy, and that's given me a lot of energy today. Do you have any good habits or routines, rituals?
Yes, I do. Well, I usually have my house is very close to the beach. So one of the things that I usually do is to go walking on the beach every week. And this gives me more energy because, the sun, the water, the sand and everything. So this is a habit that I have, working on the beach every week, at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And also I do yoga classes. That's been helping me a lot because the stress levels with, owning a company have risen a bit. So the yoga classes help me keep me more calm and more relaxed in the stressful times.
You need that balance. That's amazing. I'm a fan of a bucket list. Are there one or two things you could share maybe on your bucket list?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's one thing that I'm planning on doing in the next few years, which is a trip to Africa to do a safari, because it's something that I've always wanted to do. So this is one. And there's another one that I've tried and that I've kind of taken out of my bucket list because I really wanted to go skydiving. But I tried like 3 times already and the weather conditions were never good. So I kind of believed that this was a sign, like, don't go skydiving.
Oh, those are good ones. But yeah, I'm not going to jump out of a plane. I'll do some other adventurous things, but I love the travel, and that sounds really neat. Africa and a safari. Let's talk about a book or a podcast, documentaries. Is there something you'd recommend to our podcast listeners that you really enjoyed?
Well, I'm a fan of reading. So I am reading a very good book now, which is a book from Marshall Rosenberg, Nonviolent Communication. And it's a book that talks about how you can communicate with other people in your life, not only for work, but personal and in your life in general. And it has a very good approach on how you can express your needs in a way that is non-violent. I think that we're living in a very violent world today in terms of communication and social media and everything. People are communicating in a very violent way in general. So I think this book is very needed. I think it's one that everyone should read because it will give us insight on, how to become a little bit more friendly and peaceful with others.
Wow, what a great recommendation. I'll put links to the books and your recommendations in our podcast show notes so everybody can check it out. Thank you. As we start to wind down, 2 more questions here, Francine. One is, if you look back on your career, is there any career advice you wish you'd have known a little earlier?
Well, yes, there is. I think that one of the things that is more important to me and that I learned in this journey is that if you really put your mind to doing something that you want, you'll get it eventually. So just never give up on what you really want to do and have perseverance and, just try to network with people and try to be close to people that do things that you really want to work with. So when I started working in the green building industry, I really decided that I wanted to work and I had to say no to all the other things. So it's really important to have that clear in your mind. If you want to work with something, not only the green building, of course, but any other thing that you want to work with, you just need to put your mind to it and never give up. And eventually you'll be able to get what you want and to work with what you want. So I think that my journey has shown me this.
Yeah, that's great advice, kind of business and life advice there. So final question. Let's say someone is listening to your podcast, they're getting inspired. Maybe they're even in Brazil and they might want to get into green buildings. Any words of encouragement for them if they're jumping in right now?
Yes. Well, I believe that the green building industry is going to become bigger and bigger every year. I think the ESG movement will help us through this. And I believe that green buildings will be a norm, not only something that, is voluntary. I believe that we're going to walk in the next few years to something where the legislation and, the laws already set a higher bar for the buildings in general. So what I truly believe is that we need more and more professionals, passionate professionals, good professionals that really want to work in this business. We need a lot of them for the next few years because I really believe that the movement is going to get bigger and bigger. So if you really want to work with this and you like this area, don't hesitate. Just, study a lot and I'm sure that there'll be plenty of jobs for you in the future.
What an energetic conversation today. Everybody connect with Francine on LinkedIn. Check out some of the good work she's doing with her team there in Brazil. And thank you for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for this invitation. This great talk. It was a pleasure talking to you.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.